Imagine being Isekai'd as the main character, but still getting roasted by life itself. Like, bro didn't just get sent to another world. He got handed the worstless starter pack in existence, like trash skills, zero charisma, and even a face so tragic that it deserves its own recap. The story kicked off with our boy Haru, a certified loner who spent his breaks hiding under his desk reading manga like the basement-dwelling weeb he was. While the rest of the class lived their cliché high school lives, future gangsters plotting their next suspension, dumb baddies pretending to be hot stuff, nerds fighting over waifu rankings, Haru sat there isolated like human background noise. Just when he thought he could seek in a nap, a glowing magic circle lit up the classroom. Everyone else would have been hyped about free tickets to another world, but Haru? He decided it wasn't worth the effort.
What?
Man literally tried to walk away from an isekai. Sadly, his spaghetti arms couldn't even open the door, so he ended up crawling into an air vent like a cockroach trying to avoid eviction. Of course, the glowing circle wasn't going to let him off that easy. It sucked him in anyway. He woke up in an endless white room, confused as hell. He prayed for a baddie princess to show up and explain things, but instead got approached by a ragged old homeless dude who looked like he'd been banned from every subway station. The man flailed his arms, making signs like a crackhead in withdrawal, and somehow, Haru's lonely virgin brain decoded it. Turned out his classmates had already passed through, choosing broken powers like gamers speedrunning a character select screen. Haru was the last one left, and all that remained were the garbage tier skills no one wanted. The old man admitted he miscalculated how many students he summoned, so Haru was stuck with trash. Furious, Haru grabbed the geezer by the collar, but the man simply dumped every leftover skill on him and kicked him out like yesterday's trash. Landing in the new world, Haru had nothing but a bag full of bargain bin abilities that left him weaker than an NPC villager. But when he checked the bag, he realized it had infinite storage, which made all that junk suddenly worth something. Then a dice appeared on his palm. Thinking it would ruin him even further, he rolled it anyway and tossed the result into his luck stat. To his shock, the M meant max, instantly shooting his luck to god tier levels. His pathetic stats somehow unlocked hidden survival abilities, as if the universe refused to let him become instant monster food. Even with zero building skills, he decided to make a shelter. He wandered the forest cluelessly until plot armor bailed him out again. From his bag, he pulled out magic contact lenses that acted like cheat code scanners. Using them, he identified edible mushrooms, thankfully the safe kind, not the trip into another dimension kind your shady cousin sells at family BBQs. He even located fresh water from a nearby stream. Later, he stumbled upon a massive cave, way bigger than the brain space he clearly lacked. Like an idiot, he marched straight inside and nearly screamed when loose rocks fell, scaring him half to death. But instead of learning a lesson, he decided it was cozy. Pulling gear out of his infinite bag, he set up a tent and lantern like a survival noob cheating with mods. That night, Haru sat by his little campfire, staring at his stats like they were stock prices. To his shock, he was finally slightly less useless than a wet napkin. He had even unlocked a few new skills, which meant he was no longer the weakest sack of bones in the forest. Feeling proud, he whined to himself about not having a girlfriend, as if any self-respecting baddie would risk her future with someone who radiated permanent loser energy. The next morning, he woke up smug as hell, bragging to himself that his gear kept him from becoming monster sushi. He cooked up what he called a gourmet breakfast, fried mushrooms and random dried meat from his bag. One bite in and he almost cried tears of joy. This simple slop slapped so hard it could make Gordon Ramsay shed a single proud tear. The magic bag was basically his sugar daddy, spawning pans, knives, tents, and whatever else he needed like a never-ending loot piñata. If Haru had any work ethic, he could have started the #1 survival channel in this world, but let's be real, this man was too lazy to edit a single video. After stuffing his face, he went out to gather herbs and mushrooms, but the forest had other plans. Two goblins waddled by, giggling with the single brain cell they were sharing that day. Haru panicked and hid like a coward before realizing they were smaller than his balls. The only problem? His weapon was a pathetic twig. He juiced it up with his packing magic, turning it into a budget lightsaber, and smacked the goblins silly until they dropped unconscious. Not exactly heroic, but it worked. He washed his sweaty, filthy face in the same river he drank from like an idiot and then strutted back to his cave. To his delight, his skills had leveled up again, which made him think he was finally evolving past worthless trash. The next morning, he woke up dreaming of meat instead of mushrooms, but his inner coward reminded him that his vegan class rep would probably pop up and cancel him if he killed a rabbit. With no choice, he choked down another sad mushroom meal, then decided it was training time. After lying around doing absolutely nothing, he finally got moving, using magic wrap to boost his speed. Turns out, it worked. He was suddenly fast enough to bully goblins like an overpowered schoolyard bully. Over the next few days, Haru fell into a routine: hunt mushrooms, terrorize goblins, and furnish his cave like he was pimping out a loser's bachelor pad. Eventually, he could stomp goblins without breaking a sweat, and his cave started to look more like a cozy hideout than a death trap. One night, while out hunting, he finally spotted what he wanted most: an unlucky rabbit. He chased it with the energy of a starving man, thinking he was finally about to eat some real meat. But just as he was about to score his dinner, he realized he wasn't alone. Hiding in the bushes, he spotted his classmates wandering through the area, splitting into groups with their room temperature IQs. His appetite gone, Haru let the rabbit escape, cursing his rotten luck. For a second, he thought about walking up to the class rep since she had always been kind to him, but then he remembered that was simp behavior, and he was living his fake Sigma lifestyle now. Unfortunately, his survival skills were non-existent, so he stepped on a branch and made a loud noise. Every classmate turned toward him. Haru dove into the bushes, praying to the gods of plot armor to save him. Thankfully, the rabbit he spared earlier distracted the class and pulled their attention away. Instead of escaping, Haru decided to lurk around the delinquents' camp. The horny idiots were talking about nothing but the class rep's massive milkers, because of course they were. They even caught one of the weebs, Tanaka, and bullied him for info on his powers before heading back to their tents. When the coast cleared, Haru crept back to his cave, where he ate his regular dinner of mushrooms and incel energy. To his surprise, his loner stats had risen again, as if the universe itself was tired of his antisocial ass. Among his new skills was Master of None, which made him scatterbrained like a hamster on cocaine, but also allowed him to dabble in a bunch of things. He sulked over another mushroom meal, then decided to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Just outside his cave, a loud commotion began, threatening to drag him into yet another disaster. Haru stepped out of his cave to investigate the noise and discovered the class nerds locked in combat with a few goblins. For a moment, he thought about helping them, but his paranoia kicked in, and he used his clairvoyance skill to peek at their stats. To his surprise, these anime-addicted virgins were already higher level than him. He figured since they had wasted their lives memorizing Isekai'd tropes, they probably knew how to handle themselves. So, like the coward he was, Haru turned to leave. But just as he did, another squad of goblins crept up from behind the nerds, clubs in hand, ready to turn them into paste. Sighing like life itself was bullying him, Haru decided to help anyway. He leapt into action, smacking down the ambushers all by himself. The nerd squad, amazed by his sudden heroics, thanked him sincerely. Haru then invited them back to his cave, flexing his pimped-out hideout like he was the king of survival. The nerds walked in and looked around like peasants visiting a palace, completely blown away by how cozy his man cave had become. Curious, Haru asked why they were out wandering so late at night. The nerds exchanged awkward looks before finally confessing that they were basically exiled from the main class camp. They explained how everything went downhill after the initial Isekai'd drop. While the girls had broken down crying for their moms, the nerds had been hyped. This was the moment they dreamed of since they first touched a light novel. They immediately started crafting survival strategies like it was their personal D&D campaign. But before they even formed a proper party, the delinquents barged in, threatening to beat their faces in unless the nerds became their servants. As if that wasn't bad enough, an entire army of goblins crashed the scene mid-argument. The whole class panicked, and even the self-proclaimed alpha male delinquents soiled themselves like toddlers. But the nerds were ready. They summoned their starter weapons and charged into the fray, dragging the rest of the class into a messy but surprisingly successful battle. Somehow, the students survived, all thanks to the nerd squad. After the chaos, the class rep took charge, organizing everyone into groups and building a camp by the river. She basically became the mother hen, keeping the headless chickens in order. But of course, the class Karens couldn't handle being useful. Despite contributing absolutely nothing, they loudly refused to do any chores. When the rep begged them to at least help a little, they stormed off in dramatic fashion, and a handful of brain-dead classmates followed like sheep. Meanwhile, the meathead delinquents cooked up their own plan: grind levels, get stronger, and create their own harem of baddies. With the brain capacity of a goldfish, they didn't even bother keeping this scheme a secret. The nerds overheard and immediately snitched to the rep. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she baited the delinquents into attacking her, then mopped the floor with all of them in seconds. She exposed their little plot to everyone, and the delinquents got booted from camp like expired milk. Unfortunately, those rejects returned later to smash up the campsite in a petty act of revenge. And instead of blaming the obvious culprits, the Karens pointed at the nerds, accusing them of starting the mess. The rep defended them passionately, but her words fell on deaf ears. The nerds were voted out and forced to leave, carrying themselves with what little dignity they had left. Haru, hearing this, felt joy deep in his bones. For once, he wasn't the biggest loser in the room. To celebrate, he threw a mushroom party for his fellow social rejects. The nerds loved it, finally finding someone as bottom tier as themselves. By the next morning, they invited Haru to join their little incel alliance. But Haru declined, saying he'd rather start his own farm and live the Sigma loner dream.
Stop it. Get some help.
When he later scouted the area where the class had built their campsite, he was surprised to find it completely abandoned. His instincts told him something wasn't right, so he activated his clairvoyance to search for any signs of life. What he found next would change the atmosphere completely. Haru's clairvoyance quickly revealed the source of movement nearby, his female classmates lounging around the forest like it was a picnic spot instead of a monster-infested death zone. His heart sank. Instead of standing his ground, he panicked. Because Haru wasn't just Rizless, he was the human embodiment of "please don't talk to me, I'm scared of women." He bolted instantly, deciding that a forest full of bloodthirsty goblins was less terrifying than a pack of thirsty Delilah baddies. But the girls didn't attack. Instead, they called out after him, begging for help to find the nerds so they could apologize. Haru froze, suspicious. These were the same girls who roasted him daily. Why would they suddenly want to play nice? Trying to chase them off, he warned them about the monsters crawling all over the woods. That backfired immediately. The girls clung to him, terrified, begging to stick with him until they reunited with the nerd squad. Then they sweetened the deal, promising to form a harem and crown him their almighty Sigma King. Predictably, Haru folded faster than a cheap lawn chair. The moment he agreed, a new skill unlocked: servitude, binding the baddies to him like obedient lapdogs. To his shock, they weren't helpless at all. When monsters appeared, the girls ripped them apart with savage efficiency, turning the forest into a bloodbath. For once, Haru wasn't carrying anyone, they were carrying him. Still, the peace didn't last. After hours of walking, one girl limped from exhaustion. Trying to act gentlemanly, Haru offered medicine from his bag, but airhead Shimazaki responded by yeeting the bottle straight at his face, drenching his clothes with the foul stench of potion goo. Disgusted, Haru spiraled into a mild breakdown, realizing he was now stuck babysitting a squad of unhinged Instagram models. While he muttered to himself like a subway crackhead, the class rep appeared out of nowhere. Happy to see him alive, she called his name repeatedly. Haru ignored her, lost in his little meltdown, until she screamed so loud he snapped back to reality. The rep wasn't alone. She had brought the nerdy girls from class, all tired, cranky, and ready to complain. When she noticed Haru's servants, she asked why the baddies looked so weird. Haru, clueless, blurted out that they were now his subs. That went over about as well as telling your mom you joined OnlyFans. The rep glared, the other girls stared at him like he was a creep, and Haru backpedaled, insisting it wasn't intentional. No one believed him. Fed up, Haru tried to dip back to his cave, but the girls blocked his path. The rep then shook Shimazaki until she snapped out of her trance, freeing her from the servitude spell. Haru attempted to use the distraction to sneak away, but the nightmare wasn't done with him. He sat off to the side, fuming, while the baddies finally explained themselves. To his shock, their story actually seemed truthful. The rep thanked Haru for saving them, but all he wanted was to be dismissed. Instead, the baddies lit up at the mention of his forest home. Shocked he had a comfy hideout, they immediately plotted to invade it and turn it into their personal sorority house. Haru, down astronomically bad, let his imagination run wild, one night surrounded by baddies, fulfilling all his degenerate fantasies. He caved instantly, leading them back to his cave like a simp tour guide. His man cave, once his proud loner sanctuary, transformed into a girl's dream mansion. The girls stormed in, tossing their sweaty clothes aside to raid his luxurious bathroom, while Haru got booted outside into a tent. Ironically, he didn't mind. Being alone in the forest was still better than drowning in their non-stop chatter.
Great ass.
So here is a question for you. If you are in Haru's place, what will you do in this situation? Now, let's continue. But before he could fall asleep, the class rep slipped into his tent. She thanked him for being a bigger simp than all the other boys combined, since they had abandoned the girls to survive alone, but Haru was desperate enough to let them freeload. Then she confessed something. She felt useless compared to the nerds. Haru saw an opportunity to climb her approval ladder. He threw the nerds under the bus, saying they only knew what to do because they wasted their lives preparing for this world. The rep clapped back with a reverse Uno, pointing out that Haru was even more prepared than them. Translation: he was the king of losers.
Damn!
That whole crushing truth left Haru stunned, while the rep left him alone in his tent. He drifted off to sleep, dreaming not of survival, but of clapping those milky cheeks he'd never get close to in real life. Haru, the certified simp lord, woke up with morning wood, only to find one of the mansion baddies sitting right next to him in his tent. She slid closer, asking if he was ready for breakfast. For a moment, Haru was stunned. This was new. A girl in his tent in the morning? His brain blue-screened. But the second she mentioned fried fish, his excitement skyrocketed, and he clumsily knocked his forehead into hers like a true caveman. Without a shred of dignity, he sprinted outside and devoured the fish like a barbarian who hadn't eaten in weeks. The class rep stared at him in disbelief and asked how he lived next to a river, yet never caught a single fish. Haru's response was peak degenerate energy. He claimed the fish were faster than she was in bed and slipperier than her sister sliding into his DMs.
Nice.
He then questioned how these girls, who usually acted like Instagram influencers lost on a camping trip, managed to catch fish at all. Their answer? By blasting the river with lightning until the poor fish floated belly up. Curious, Haru asked for a demonstration. When they did, he juiced the magic with his packing ability. The result? Instant fish genocide. This little trick triggered a new ability, unlocking elemental magic. The girls screamed that he was cheating, but Haru shrugged it off, blaming the senile old man who summoned them. In reality, his powers worked because his useless packing skill fused with his equally useless Master of None skill. Individually, they were trash. Combined, they slapped harder than his raging crush on the class rep. When Haru asked about their plans, the rep explained they intended to head into the nearby town, just like the nerds. Haru suspected they were chasing those guys again, but the baddies swore they weren't. Wanting to look useful, he offered to train them, only to find out every single one of them was higher level than him. While he was struggling at level 7, the weakest among them was level 16. Reality hit him like a truck kun. He wasn't the teacher here, he was the dead weight. Still, an opportunity presented itself when he noticed bushes rustling nearby. He hyped up the girls, telling them to train by defeating the wolves hiding inside. The girls thought it would be easy. Spoiler, it wasn't. They underestimated the wolves, thinking the beasts would just roll over. Instead, the wolves sent them straight back to the kitchen. Their humiliating defeat was so brutal, it probably set women's rights back 50 years. Later, they held a performance review meeting in Haru's tent, trying to figure out why they were all collectively useless. Once the meeting ended, most of them left for another Rhea match. But the girl who woke Haru earlier stayed behind. She apologized, admitting she had been testing him to see if he was a gentleman or a creep. Shockingly, Haru passed, and he accepted her apology. The next morning, she proved it by waking him with roasted fish. Haru was so happy he could cry, but while munching away, he overheard the girls prepping for a Rhea match again, this time with zero planning. Luckily, the class rep still had the last working brain cell in the group. She stopped their stupidity and reminded them they needed to train properly before facing stronger monsters. Their training began with low-level goblins, but even that turned into a massacre. The goblins beat them down so hard it could have been used in an anti-feminist propaganda video. Still, the girls didn't quit. They trained until, eventually, they were strong enough to challenge the wolves again. This time, they actually worked together and won. For once, they proved they were at least slightly more useful than a calculator in an Asian kid's backpack. The class rep, impressed, thanked Haru for helping them train and invited him to join them on their trip to town. The next morning, Haru prepared for the journey by shoving literally everything he could into his magic bag. He even tried to convince his breakfast girl to stay behind and guard his mansion, but the class rep shut that idea down instantly. She insisted everyone stick together. Resigned, Haru told her the only way they'd survive the forest was by working as a team, even if that team was a bunch of freeloaders and airheads. Deep in the forest, one of Haru's unlucky classmates was being chased by a hooded figure. Just like every idiot in a horror movie, the boy suddenly forgot how to use his legs, tripped over nothing, and ate dirt. The figure caught up immediately, wrapped its hands around his neck, and choked the poor guy until his subscription to life ran out. With the job done, the figure walked away casually, like it had just finished taking out the trash. Meanwhile, Haru and his group didn't make it far before running into an orc so ugly it looked like Shrek's failed cousin. This beast had the IQ of a rock and the hygiene of a public restroom. Haru, in his delusional white knight phase, ordered the girls to step back so he could fight it alone. His weapon? A pathetic twig. The orc countered with its massive club, but swung slower than a toddler counting on fingers. Haru dodged, but quickly realized physical attacks were useless. Thankfully, he remembered the nerds saying orcs could only be killed with magic. Pulling up his skill stats, Haru saw elemental magic was his only option. Before he could think it through, the orc lunged again. Haru dodged, jabbed with his tiny wood, and, shockingly, sent the orc straight to orc heaven. Hyped by the win, he tried fire magic on the next orc, roasting it into BBQ. For once, he didn't look completely worthless. That night, while the girls cooked their sad excuse for dinner, Haru set magical traps around camp like a paranoid homeowner. Then, he used his appraisal skill like Google Maps to chart their path out of the forest. But before he could relax, shadows approached. Ready for delinquents, Haru prepped to fight, only to discover it was just the jocks. Surprisingly, these meatheads were friendly. Haru accused them of creeping on the girls, but they explained they were actually looking for him. Suspicious, Haru wondered if they wanted to play with his sausage, but they quickly shut that down. Instead, they told him they were searching for a mysterious skill, rumored to be stronger than even the delinquents' puppetry and mesmerize. Haru instantly remembered seeing hijack on the summoning skill board. The jocks revealed that since no one bragged about hijack earlier, they assumed Haru had it. Haru clarified he didn't. His skill was just servitude, basically glorified dog-sitting. Still, they warned him about hijack's danger, then left, telling him to apologize to the class rep. Too bad the rep had been eavesdropping the whole time like a jealous ex with trust issues. The next morning, Haru told the girls to prep for training. To his confusion, the baddies acted way too excited, like someone had spiked their mushrooms with something questionable. As Haru prepared to lead, the class rep pulled him aside for a private talk. He accepted instantly, hoping for a special morning routine. Instead, she admitted she had been listening in last night, basically confessing to being a jealous girlfriend. Before she could explain herself, Haru coldly dropped the bomb. He already knew she was the one holding the hijack skill. Shocked, the rep asked why he hadn't tried to stop her. Haru explained that the nerds already knew but trusted her, and so did he. He added that he believed she wouldn't turn into the Austrian artist with that kind of power. Relieved, the rep thanked him, secretly swooning over his rare display of faith. Haru, uncomfortable with the emotional weight, bolted into the forest like a man running from child support. The girls returned to training, their thirst for him somehow growing even stronger. Seeing an opportunity, Haru began selling some of his potions and juices, fully exploiting their desperation while pretending to be their mentor. As expected, the girls got thirstier than ever, practically drooling over Haru like he was the last can of Monster Energy at an anime convention. One of the bimbo girls even offered her expired body in exchange for a taste. And because Haru's brain was 90% hormones and 10% air, he actually considered it. Thankfully, the class rep shut that down instantly, clapping back like a traffic cop at a busted intersection. They continued through the forest until Haru spotted a stream. The smirk on his face screamed, "I'm about to do something stupid." The class rep grew suspicious and insisted on going with him, but Haru bolted before she could finish her sentence. Pumping himself full of multiple skills, he pulled off wild superhuman feats, jumping, sprinting, and occasionally looking like he could fly. Weight manipulation made him agile. Reflexes boosted him further, and soon he was swinging through the trees like a monkey on cocaine. Eventually, he even started floating, giving him a god's eye view of the forest. From up there, he realized they were almost free. Unfortunately, Haru ran out of momentum and plummeted from the sky faster than my grades back in high school. He cratered into the ground, surviving with only a few bruises and a bruised ego. That night, back at camp, the class rep nagged him like a discount version of his mom. After a few more trials, the group finally escaped the cursed forest. Their next challenge was a massive grassy field. Along the way, Haru's walking skill evolved into airwalk, basically turning him into anime Jesus. He strutted above the ground like he owned the sky. From up there, he spotted a wagon of helpless NPCs under attack by monsters. Running back, he informed the class rep, who suggested sending the fastest group members to help. Haru, drunk on his own hero complex, decided to go alone. He lightened his body with weight manipulation, then used bursts of wind magic to propel himself forward. It was genius, until it wasn't. The class rep, clinging to his cloak without him realizing, ruined everything. With their combined weight dragging him down, the two crash-landed like a torpedo, smashing directly into the monsters and knocking them out by sheer accident. The class rep was knocked cold, but Haru stood tall, taking all the credit. The NPCs cheered, thanking him for saving their weak behinds. Their leader, a guy named Gafk, admitted they had been hired to hunt wolves but got absolutely clapped. They praised Haru like he was the second coming, so he rewarded them with mushrooms from his stash. One NPC tried the shrooms and realized they were basically performance enhancers, instantly healing their wounds and restoring energy. They passed the mushrooms around like free samples at Costco. Haru, however, was too busy seething with jealousy. The convoy had a squad of baddies, and watching the NPC men enjoy their company was pure torture for his simp soul. Before he could embarrass himself, the class rep woke up and shut him down. Soon, the rest of the girls arrived and were immediately intrigued by the elves traveling with the convoy. The grateful adventurers decided to repay Haru by escorting his circus crew into the nearest city. When they arrived, the bustling town was full of life, merchants, and excitement. But Haru felt completely out of place, sulking like the emo loner he was. The girls, on the other hand, lost their minds over the clothing shops. Apparently, fashion was more important than survival. One gremlin girl even tried to bite a building, convinced it was a giant cupcake. The class rep, forever cursed to play mom, asked Haru to help wrangle the chaos. But Haru had spiritually clocked out, done babysitting these glorified NPCs. He left her to handle it. Annoyed, she blew her whistle, summoning the girls like a pack of unruly pets. With order barely restored, she made the decision. They would register at the Adventurers Guild and sell off some loot to prepare for what came next. After the guild trip, the group decided to call it a day and search for the nerds tomorrow. The Valley girls weren't happy. They wanted to hunt for Nerd D immediately. Haru knew it, even if they denied it, and he laughed at their terrible poker faces. The next stop was the Adventurers Guild, a massive stone building crawling with battle-scarred veterans. Gafk, the adventurer Haru saved earlier, invited him inside to meet the guildmaster. But Haru froze the moment he noticed every man in there looked like a grizzled MMA fighter. while he looked like a malnourished library kid. Worse, the boss was a giant scary dude with a mustache straight out of a Captain Hook cosplay. To Haru's relief, the guy turned out to be father-friendly, thanking him for saving his men and nothing more. Haru bolted out of the office before things got awkward. He spotted a small shop nearby and decided to pawn some loot. That's when he found out his gems were worth so much, the store couldn't even pay him on the spot. He was officially rich, but had to wait until tomorrow for the appraisal to finish. Just as he was about to leave, the girls barged in bragging about how they registered as adventurers. Haru was stunned. The bar was so low that even the Karens got approved. No wonder the world was still overflowing with monsters. The girls pressured Haru into registering as well. He strolled up to the counter with fake confidence, only for the receptionist to crush him in seconds. His level was too low, below 10, and guild rules required at least 20 if you were a loner. Haru collapsed to his knees, realizing once again he was still the class failure. The rep tried to cheer him up, inviting him to spend the night in a fancy hotel with the others. Haru immediately noted the hotel screamed, "Hanky-panky getaway," but the rep shut him down before he could fantasize too far. The next morning, Haru decided to leave the town since there was nothing left for him. Before going, he went back to the shop to collect his gem money, only to learn the shop had run out of cash. They could only hand him 8 million. In this world, that made him richer than Elon Musk. The girls' eyes lit up instantly. They weren't just traveling with him anymore, they were about to spend his money like it was Black Friday. That's when Gafk returned, suggesting a place for Haru to drop his newfound fortune. Haru's degenerate brain immediately pictured a strip club full of anime-tier baddies. Instead, Gafk dragged him to a dusty artifact shop with an owner who looked like he wasn't legally allowed near playgrounds. To Haru's surprise, the shop had solid equipment, so he shopped like an Instagram influencer blowing daddy's credit card. Then, he found a strange necklace with the number 7 engraved on it. Curious, he asked about it. The shopkeeper explained it allowed users to fuse multiple items into one. Excited, Haru bought more gear, but before he could finish, the class rep showed up to remind him it was past his bedtime. Panicked, Haru knocked the items together, accidentally activating the necklace. Everything fused into one massive piece of equipment worth 10 million. The shopkeeper freaked out because Haru hadn't paid yet. Haru tried to wiggle out of the debt, but was forced to fork over everything. Just like that, he went from Elon Musk to broke college student in one night. To make things worse, he couldn't even go outside to grind gems since he wasn't a registered adventurer. He thought about sneaking out with the girls, but they didn't trust him enough to let him tag along. So Haru resorted to using the invisibility cloak he bought earlier. Miraculously, it worked, and he slipped out into the streets unnoticed. But because his IQ is lower than room temperature, he immediately took the cloak off before leaving the village, practically announcing himself to the world. Just when Haru thought he was about to make a clean getaway, life delivered another L. As he leapt for the wall, a few girls spotted him, distracting him mid-jump. The result? He landed nuts first, smashing his already useless sack that hadn't been in service for years. While writhing in pain, he noticed something else. One girl was missing. Specifically, the thirsty one who had tried to strip for his juice earlier. Red flag immediately raised. Haru and the others went to track her down. Sure enough, they found her halfway to her birthday suit, ready to become the next forced fan service meme. The group dragged her away before she embarrassed herself, or worse, permanently traumatized Haru's last remaining brain cells. The next day, the class rep punished Haru for trying to escape, grounding him like a naughty toddler. While the girls went on quests, he was stuck in the tower on timeout. But Haru had other plans. The moment they left, he whipped out his invisibility cloak. This time, he had the rare IQ boost to actually keep it on until he cleared the village walls. Out in the woods, Haru stumbled across a group of bandits harassing a girl in her carriage. True to form, he shrugged it off, deciding it wasn't his problem. Unfortunately, the bandits spotted him and decided witnesses weren't allowed. Forced into action, Haru summoned a staff he had never seen before. He quickly realized it was probably a result of his earlier accidental fusion. Either way, it worked. He torched the bandits with fire magic, disciplining them like an angry dad with a slipper. The bandits, humiliated, tried to overwhelm him, but they were basic level NPCs with zero strategy, just spamming the same predictable attacks. Haru dodged everything until they literally exhausted themselves and collapsed. As they lay in a sweaty heap, the carriage owner stepped out, a little girl named Muriel. She thanked him for saving her and casually revealed she was royalty from the nearby town. Haru immediately wrote her off as another airhead, but she pulled herself together and asked him to escort her as a bodyguard. At first, Haru wasn't impressed. After all, the town had done nothing but piss him off since he arrived, but when she promised a reward, his broke ass agreed instantly. Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, the jocks were clashing with the delinquents who were still hunting for the girls. Just when one delinquent lunged in for an attack, he was skewered from behind by the hooded figure. The killer then dismantled the rest with terrifying ease, blocking their attacks and slaughtering them with their own weapons. The jocks quickly realized they were out of their league and tried to flee, but the stranger caught up before they made it far. Back in the village, Haru whined endlessly as Muriel dragged him to her mansion. He sulked the entire way like a child forced to do chores. But once inside, he was stunned by the size of the estate and the lavish family portraits on display. Even then, his first instinct was to sneak out again. And in true Haru fashion, he completely forgot his invisibility cloak existed and just tried to walk away like no one would notice. Predictably, the princess caught him instantly. Insisting on showing her gratitude, she offered him royal treatment. Haru gave up resisting and accepted her hospitality. First came a feast fit for kings, which he devoured like a starving gremlin who hadn't eaten since childhood. Then, to make things extra, she handed him a VIP ID card, granting free access in and out of the city. Basically the cheat code he had been begging for since day one. Haru didn't even react. He just kept munching food, ignoring her like a rejected Tinder date. Muriel sulked quietly, but Haru was in full Sigma mode. Feelings weren't on his menu, only food. The next morning, Haru was back at the hotel, facing an interrogation squad, aka his harem. The girls demanded to know where the hell he vanished the night before. Haru, being the pathological liar he is, calmly claimed he got invited to a noble's house, but pretended not to know why. Since none of them had two working brain cells to rub together, they believed him. Still, the class rep, playing mom of the group yet again, told him to stay put this time. Haru nodded like a good little boy, but the second they stepped outside, he ghosted without hesitation. Before leaving town, he stocked up on food and even left a little note for the class rep explaining himself like some wannabe romantic. Then, flexing his shiny new VIP ID card at the gate, he strolled right past the guards. Finally, he was free, back to being a proud loner. As he wandered through the forest, he realized that even though his old life was full of hunger and near-death experiences, it was still way better than babysitting a bunch of clueless girls. But the peace didn't last. A random monster jumped him, forcing Haru to smack it down with his stick. He quickly noticed his new equipment made him stronger, but the forest itself felt wrong. Going deeper, he spotted blood on the ground. His dumbass brain started guessing. It could have belonged to the nerds, the delinquents, or maybe the jocks. Using his tracking skill, he followed the trail and eventually found the jocks sprawled out like corpses. Panicking, Haru doused them with his special fluids until they coughed back to life. They confirmed the girls were fine, but explained the nightmare they had just lived through. The hooded stranger had wiped out the delinquents, stolen their weapons, and nearly killed them all. When Haru asked about the nerds, the jocks admitted they had no clue if those four-eyed gremlins survived. What they did know was far worse. The stranger was hunting specifically for the class rep's hijack skill. Haru was stunned since he thought only him and the nerds knew about it. The jocks revealed the guy kept demanding her location, then beat them half to death, hoping whoever came to rescue them would lead him to her. And now, since Haru dragged them back to his cave, the stranger's target was him. The jocks offered to fight alongside him, but Haru refused. On the outside, he acted cocky, but deep down he was sweating bullets. Even so, he told the jocks to run back to town and protect the girls. If they lost, the harem would be defenseless. That left him alone to deal with the hooded freak. And for once, Haru admitted he needed to train like crazy or he'd end up as fertilizer. He began analyzing what he knew. The stolen weapons were single use. Once activated, they couldn't be canceled. If he wanted to stand a chance, he needed a skill that didn't have that flaw. Just as he was deep in thought, a group of goblins showed up, drawn by the blood. Haru saw it as free XP and started smacking them around, but to his frustration, the farming didn't work. Before he could figure out why, a massive troll with a hammer appeared. Swinging for his life, Haru barely dodged, then fused his skills into his staff, landing a one-shot kill that flattened the beast. He barely had time to celebrate before another goblin appeared, except this one wasn't normal. Its aura screamed cracked-out nightmare. Haru scanned it and was horrified to see its level was insanely high. He tried fusing his skills again and went for another one-shot, but this time the goblin tanked it and countered with brutal force. Haru pushed back using a new skill, Gambit, but the goblin healed instantly like it was playing on cheat codes. Then, it fired off a massive energy slash that sent Haru crashing into the trees, nearly ending him right there. For the first time, Haru realized the truth. He might actually be cooked. Haru was beaten, bruised, and looking like roadkill, but he remembered one thing: the jocks had survived a worse ass-kicking than this. If those steroid junkies could live, then so could he. So he forced himself to give it one last push, and somehow it worked. His staff connected, the overpowered goblin collapsed, and Haru finally leveled up to 11. A pathetic number, sure, but for this clown it was like winning the lottery. Dragging his sorry body back to his pimped-out cave, Haru checked his stats. His Gambit skill had been confirmed, meaning he'd finally found a way to stand against the hooded freak. The next morning, his guest of honor arrived. The hooded menace stepped out of the shadows, pulled down the hood, and boom. It was Tanaka, the four-eyed dweeb nobody liked, now dripping with villain energy. Tanaka looked annoyed. He had hoped the jocks would lead him to the class rep, not the class reject. Haru asked if everything had been planned from the start, and Tanaka answered with the smugness of every edgy anime villain ever. He casually mentioned he had already slaughtered all the other boys in the class as if that was just Monday morning warm-up. Then, like a true prick, he told Haru to get his filthy face out of his sight. Haru refused. Tanaka's grin widened as he flexed his power. He mocked Haru for picking trash skills, then launched a barrage of rocks using his metal skill, trying to crush him. But Haru dodged, proving he wasn't completely useless. Tanaka actually seemed impressed before activating 2 glowing orbs, his Dragon Balls, and merging them into one massive crystal nut. Jagged spikes shot up from the ground, aiming to cripple Haru permanently. Somehow, Haru leapt back just in time, barely keeping his knees intact. The dickhead then asked when Haru started suspecting him. Haru shot back that he knew something was off when Tanaka was chilling with the delinquents. That actually impressed Tanaka, who admitted Haru wasn't as brain-dead as he thought. When Haru asked when he planned to start his evil scheme, Tanaka confessed he'd been plotting since the second they got Isekai'd. The only reason he waited was because he missed out on hijack and needed another way to power up. Suddenly, Tanaka summoned twine from the ground, trapping Haru's ankles before setting it on fire. But just as he thought the match was over, Haru absorbed the flames into his wooden staff, shocking the bespectacled bastard. With Tanaka distracted, Haru launched a counterattack, but Tanaka wasn't done flexing. He summoned a massive sword and blocked it with ease. Then, in full anime boss mode, he called forth an entire armory, cycling through weapons like he was shopping at Costco. Haru couldn't keep up. Every swing came from a different angle, unpredictable and relentless. Eventually, one clean strike sent Haru flying across the river, crashing into the bank like a ragdoll. Tanaka followed, taunting him, asking if he was finished. Haru realized the truth. The guy had so many skills, it was impossible to guess his next move. That's when it hit him. Tanaka wasn't naturally gifted. He had copied his classmates' abilities using a skill called copycat. Tanaka admitted it proudly. His goal was simple: steal the class rep's hijack, become a god, and then erase everyone else while farming their skills like loot boxes. He pressed the attack, and Haru struggled, finding no openings. Finally, Tanaka lunged from behind, convinced it was the end. But Haru smirked, sidestepping with ease. He whispered the truth. He had figured out Tanaka's weakness. The four-eyed edgelord could only use 3 skills at once. That's why he never repeated the same attack more than twice. Haru had baited him into spamming everything earlier just to study his patterns. Now, the tables were turning. For the first time, Tanaka was the one sweating. But Tanaka, still high on his own delusions, came charging at Haru like a red-headed stepchild desperate for attention. Haru casually sidestepped, then swung his hard wooden staff straight into Tanaka's gut, launching him backward like yesterday's trash. Haru told him he didn't care about his fake genius act and was about to smack the red out of his hairline when Tanaka pulled a reverse Uno, firing a flaming ball straight at him. Haru barely dodged, realizing this low-testosterone nerd still packed dangerous power. That's when Tanaka unveiled his so-called ultimate weapon, a shiny dagger Haru had never seen. He dashed at impossible speed, slicing from every angle, kicking up enough dust to turn the battlefield into a sandstorm. Haru braced himself, but in reality, the dweeb was hiding behind a rock, charging up his deadliest skill, instant death. The attack hit, summoning a swarm of ghostly skulls that latched onto Haru and sucked the life right out of him. Our boy collapsed, lifeless on the ground. Tanaka laughed like a discount anime villain, stomping Haru's head for extra disrespect before turning to hunt down Hijack. But just as he strutted away, a voice called out. He froze, turning back to see Haru standing tall, glowing with aura like he'd respawned in God mode. Tanaka's eyes widened. Instant death was supposed to be 100% fatal. Haru explained the skill counted as a status debuff, but thanks to his well-being perk, he had resistance. Add his maxed out luck stat, and the attack's success rate dropped harder than Tanaka's self-esteem. Tanaka demanded to know why Haru fell so dramatically, and Haru roasted him again. He had just been feeding Four Eyes' delusion to bait him. Tanaka then ranted about why his meddling skill hadn't stopped Haru's movements. But Haru had puppeteered himself through the restrictions, dodging even when his body should have been locked down. The edgelord finally snapped. He swung wildly, but Haru shrugged off every attack like it was a toddler tantrum. He told Tanaka that math and logic didn't mean jack in this dumb fantasy world. All that mattered was plot armor, and Haru had plenty. Tanaka lunged with desperation, but Haru smacked his blade away. The wannabe genius tried one last trick, telekinetically flinging his sword for a cheap stab. He even screamed that he'd already won, but Haru was done playing. He crushed him, knocked him out cold, and finished the fight with his gambit skill, leaving Tanaka broken in the dirt. Haru staggered, completely drained, convinced he wasn't making it out alive. Just before collapsing, the nerd squad appeared out of nowhere, catching him before he hit the ground. They poured medicine down his throat and carried him back like the dead weight he was. On the way, they explained how the jocks had already told the girls, and the whole town knew he was fighting solo. Word had spread, so the nerds rushed in to save him. Back in town, everyone cheered like he was some big hero. Even the Karens apologized to the nerds for being insufferable earlier. Haru, true to form, tried to sneak away mid-celebration, but the girls caught him and dragged him back, threatening to tie him up if he kept running. That night, he dreamed of something darker than before. A skeletal demon wrapped in shadowy aura lurking deep in a dungeon. He woke up in a panic, confused like a squirrel that fell out of a tree, but shrugged it off because he was still the clueless dingus he had always been. Morning came, and he wandered off to meet the Nerd Squad once again, clueless of the storm that was coming. The four-eyed Nerd Squad announced they were heading into a dungeon to hunt for some legendary skill that would finally boost their riz and maybe make the crusty girls stop ghosting them. Haru told them straight up that what they actually needed was therapy, deodorant, and a 2-for-1 deal at a plastic surgeon's office.
Emotional, damn it!
The nerds fired back, saying even that couldn't fix his busted face, then waddled off like salty penguins after being roasted too hard. Haru figured that was more socializing than he could handle for the week, so he tried sneaking back to his cozy forest shack. But, as always, this absolute brain-dead goblin forgot he owned an invisibility cloak. So he got caught instantly by the class rep. She looked more pissed than a math teacher grading group projects where only one kid did the work. She told him that if he ever tried pulling a solo stunt again, she'd personally disconnect his family jewels and hang them on the guild's bulletin board.
What the fuck?
Haru folded instantly, collapsing to the ground like a wet towel, silently wishing he was fighting Tanaka again instead of this high-level Karen boss fight. After she stormed off, Haru sat there sulking, realizing he was tired of all these Karens nagging him into submission. He decided he'd do the nerds' dungeon quest himself and grab whatever skill they were chasing, hoping it might finally make the baddies simp for him. With that, he walked out of town and straight into an oncoming horde of orcs. Now, a normal person would panic, but Haru? He saw it as a warm-up session. Meanwhile, back in town, Muriel burst into the tavern like a drama queen, yelling about a massive orc army heading their way. She claimed the orcs had already flattened a neighboring village and everyone went into panic mode. The adventurers strapped on their gear and the class rep, never wanting to miss out on a chance to play girl boss, offered to join the fight. The guildmaster, for some reason, agreed, even though the girls were usually about as useful as an unplugged toaster. Back on the battlefield, Haru was tearing through the orc horde like me raiding the buffet at my cousin's wedding. Sure, there were a ton of them, but they fell like dominoes. He eventually left just the Orc King standing, an overgrown pig with delusions of grandeur. Haru smacked him around with a flurry of hits and flattened him so fast it looked like DLC on easy mode. With the horde wiped, Haru moved onto the dungeon. He snuck in using his invisibility cloak and found a hidden chest of treasure. But after appraising it, he realized the loot had about as much value as the $3.27 left in my bank account. He sighed, wishing he'd brought an actual weapons expert instead of relying on his bootleg ChatGPT brain cells. Remembering the shady shopkeeper who had sold him weapons earlier, Haru decided to head back to town and ask for help. By the time he returned, night had already fallen. To his surprise, he saw his classmates and the adventurers standing outside the city walls, fully armed like they were preparing for a final raid boss. The class rep ran up, breathless, yelling about the orc horde approaching. But Haru quickly realized the idiots had been standing there all day, waiting for an army that didn't even exist anymore. When the rep asked where he'd been, Haru gave some half-baked excuse that fooled no one. The adventurers asked if he'd seen any orcs, and Haru casually admitted he'd already wiped the entire horde solo. The guild members were impressed, but his classmates? They were pissed. After lecturing him yesterday about not running off alone, he'd gone out and done it again, this time casually saving the entire damn town. Muriel and the guild boss showered Haru with praise for saving the village, but of course they had to ruin the moment by scolding him for being reckless. They warned him that the monsters were acting way more aggressive than usual, which could only mean one thing: a monster stampede was brewing. Haru nodded politely, pretending to take their advice to heart, but deep down he was thinking these so-called responsible adults were just NPCs with no idea what they were talking about. The next morning, Haru visited the town's weapons master, a crusty old man who looked like a knockoff Voldemort from Tamu. The second he walked in, Voldy begged him to leave before he ruined his merchandise again. Haru reassured him he wasn't here to bankrupt the shop today. Instead, he wanted to know about the mysterious favorability skill. Relieved, Voldemort explained it wasn't actually a skill, but a pheromone ring that basically turned the wearer into an instant chick magnet. Haru's dumb little heart skipped a beat. Finally, something that might make women look at him without disgust. When he asked where to find it, Voldy told him it was locked away on the 50th floor of the dungeon. Each level had a final boss, and legend said an ancient emperor lurked deep inside. Haru was hyped, thanking Voldemort before rushing off to restock. What he didn't realize was that the nerds had been eavesdropping the whole time. They immediately snitched to the class rep and the baddies, who vowed to stop him from throwing his life away on such a dumb mission. On his way to the dungeon, Haru was intercepted by the girls. When they demanded to know why he was going, he lied through his crooked teeth, saying he was searching for the Solomon ring that let him talk to animals. Nobody believed that weak excuse, so Haru just sprinted past them, leaving their shrieking behind like background noise. A guard half-heartedly tried to stop him, but when nobody listened, he gave up and went back to his minimum wage shift. Inside the cave, Haru relied on his maxed-out luck stat to skip worrying about traps. Naturally, the universe called his bluff. Within seconds, the idiot tripped and crashed through a weak wall, plummeting into a bottomless pit. The class rep even tried to grab his hand, but of course, she missed. Haru fell for what felt like forever, until he finally used earth magic to soften the ground below, bouncing like a dollar store trampoline to survive. Dusting himself off, he used his Isekai Google Maps to check the dungeon's layout. That's when his trap detection skill finally activated, after he had already fallen into a trap. He was furious, calling the skill useless DLC, but still used it to check his surroundings. To his horror, he discovered the dungeon didn't just have 100 floors, it had a hidden 101st floor. As he descended deeper, the air grew thicker with poison fumes. Somehow, plot armor kept him alive long enough to push open a massive door. Immediately, he was blasted back by a gust of terrifying wind. Haru knew whatever was inside was built different. Sure enough, standing before him was the same nightmare demon he had seen in his dreams. Its aura was so overwhelming he could barely move. When he appraised it, the truth made his blood run cold. It was the Dungeon Emperor, level 100, with its skills hidden beyond appraisal. To make things worse, the creature was a hybrid, one part lich, meaning it was completely immune to ranged magic. If Haru wanted even a sliver of hope, he'd have to fight it up close. With no other option, Haru charged in, boosting his speed until he was practically breaking the sound barrier. He attacked from every angle he could, but every single strike was blocked like he was a toddler poking a pro wrestler. Even when he kicked things up to hypersonic speed, the skeleton just deflected him like it was batting flies. Haru went faster and faster, throwing everything he had, but the Dungeon Emperor swatted him away every time like a bored gamer farming trash mobs. Out of nowhere, Haru's vision blurred, and he saw himself getting stabbed straight through the chest by the demon. A split second later, the demon actually tried to stab him, proving the vision wasn't just a bad acid trip but a brand new skill. Haru realized he could now predict the monster's attacks before they happened by following its erratic movements. Instead of running for his pathetic life, he decided the only option was to stay on the offensive. Hours went by and this fool was still swinging like a drunk toddler with a broomstick. Not a single hit landed. His stamina and mana were drained, his HP bar was flashing red, and he looked like he just finished a marathon in flip-flops. Yet somehow, the idea of possibly losing turned him on. This clown was actually excited about being one tap away from death. He tried attacking one more time but collapsed, too weak to even stand. The demon walked toward him but didn't strike. Haru was confused. No killing intent, no follow-up attack. He figured it must be looking down on him as too weak to even bother killing. That pissed him off more than the fight itself. He rushed forward again, only for the demon to casually dodge and put its blade to his neck. Haru demanded to know why it wasn't finishing him off, but the creature stayed silent. Then, he finally pieced it together. The skeleton wasn't the real enemy. The dark aura wrapped around it was controlling its actions. Without hesitation, Haru used his staff to absorb the dark energy. Shockingly, it worked. The skeleton instantly dropped its sword and lowered its guard, standing there defenseless. Haru asked if it wanted to be freed through death. Still, it gave no reply, just stood motionless. The dark aura started leaking out of Haru's staff, trying to reattach itself to the skeleton, but instead of letting that happen, Haru did the most unhinged anime protagonist thing ever. He hugged the damn skeleton. He said he knew what it was like to be a lonely loser, and that he understood its pain. Somehow, that cringe line actually worked. The dark aura scattered and his servitude spell triggered, binding the skeleton to him as its master. The skeleton, now revealed to be named Angelica, shook her head when Haru asked if she was mad. They shook hands awkwardly, and he realized she was now officially on his side. Panic set in. If the class rep found out he used servitude on a girl, she'd roast him alive. Then again, Angelica was just bones. No boobs, no problem. The two tried to move on, climbing up toward another floor, only to be met with a new threat. A level 100 knight, the floor master. Haru knew damn well he couldn't beat it, so in typical caveman logic, he smashed the ceiling with earth magic to escape. The plan worked, kind of. The ceiling collapsed, but instead of freedom, two level 99 minotaurs dropped in like unpaid rent collectors. They ripped the knight to pieces but took heavy damage in the process. Haru, the opportunistic rat he was, finished them off and pocketed their gems like it was nothing. Angelica gave him a judgmental stare, but he told her to shut it because a win was a win. Then, she looked at the knight's empty armor. Haru asked if she wanted to wear it, and she nodded. At first, the weight nearly flattened her bones into dust, but with some magic, she reshaped the armor, slimming it down, adding curves, and giving it a more feminine look. Haru realized his skeletal companion had just transformed from spooky nightmare to bone-clad waifu. Haru and his new skeleton sidekick Angelica kept climbing until they reached the next floor. Right away, his danger radar started pinging. Using appraisal, he discovered the floor master was a level 98 lich. And that was a problem, because unless you had divine attacks, fighting a lich was like trying to punch Wi-Fi. His usual physical strikes were about as useful as a Nerf gun. He thought about pulling the same dumb move of blowing through the ceiling like last time, but quickly remembered how that disaster rained down minotaurs on his head. So no. Before he could overthink it further, the lich fired a massive light beam at him. Haru barely dodged, then whipped out divine magic from his trusty wood. And yes, the same wood you should try using on your girlfriend. Shockingly, it worked, and the lich went down. The next floor was swarming with an army of giant level 97 moths. Haru didn't panic. He summoned a fireball like it was mosquito season, then expanded it until all the overgrown bugs fried like they'd been left under a bug zapper. The next level was crawling with fat caterpillars, and he squashed them without even breaking a sweat. But just when he thought things were easy, the next boss showed up. A nightmare that looked like a bundle of swords taped together with bad intentions. Appraising it, Haru found out it was level 100. Of course. He tried lunging at its blind spot, but the damn robot swordsman swatted him away like a fly. Worse, one of its mini swords acted on its own, nearly skewering him. Haru was seconds away from becoming kebab meat when he remembered he had a cheat code on his side. Angelica. He tagged her in, and she calmly gathered aura like she was flexing for an anime power-up sequence. The sword boss didn't like being shown up and glowed bright red. Trying to match her aura for aura, Angelica didn't flinch. She lunged straight at it and cleaved the hunk of blades in half like it was nothing. Haru just stood there, stunned, realizing she could casually delete a level 100 monster even while nerfed. He thanked his max luck that she was on his team and not trying to slice his dumbass instead. Meanwhile, back on the other side of the dungeon, Haru's classmates were in shambles. The nerds and the girls were getting wrecked by a giant cyclops. Without Haru, they were about as useful as unplugged Wi-Fi. The nerds finally used more than 10% of their brain cells and cooked up a plan. Kakizaki leapt onto the beast as bait, distracting it just long enough for Oda to charge up an energy blast. The Cyclops swatted Kakizaki away like a mosquito, but before his body hit the dirt, Oda blasted its one eye, knocking the big idiot out. The class cheered like they'd just survived Dark Souls on easy mode, but the class rep knew the truth. They had to reach Haru soon, or it was game over. As Haru and Angelica pressed upward, the whole dungeon began to rumble like an earthquake. Outside, a guard noticed rats and other critters bolting from the cave. He turned, only to see a wave of slime monsters heading his way. Terrified, the coward screamed and ran like a little bitch back to the village. There, he reported that the monster stampede had begun. The guildmaster dusted off an ancient document that revealed the terrifying truth. The dungeon itself was alive and kept expanding. And once it reached its final floor, all its monsters would spill out in an unstoppable stampede. The only way to stop it was to kill the boss on the deepest floor. Everyone wondered who could pull that off. Muriel thought of Haru for a split second, but quickly shook her head. No way in hell that clown could be the savior, right? Before anyone in the guild could finish brainstorming, the ground shook so hard it felt like the world itself was on life support. That could only mean one thing: the monsters were already on their way. The guildmaster shut the meeting down immediately and ordered everyone to focus on evacuating civilians while preparing for the incoming assault. Meanwhile, deep in the dungeon, Haru and Angelica were still climbing through floors like a broke gamer grinding side quests. On one level, they stumbled into a whole flock of griffins circling above. Instead of flexing with flashy sword skills, Haru just yeeted them some poisoned fish like it was free sushi night. The big bad birds dropped dead mid-flight, proving once again that Haru fought like a budget pest control worker. Back with his classmates, things weren't any better. The nerds and the girls, still desperately searching for Haru, ended up face to face with a massive pack of werewolves. And because their collective combat IQ was somewhere between wet socks and expired bread, it wasn't looking good. Back in town, the adventurers finally got a break after beating the first wave of monsters. As they rested, one of them nervously pointed out the obvious, that the dumbass students were still trapped in the dungeon. The guildmaster sighed, admitted most of those kids were useless, but said Haru might just be reckless enough to actually beat the dungeon's final boss. To test this suicidal hope, they decided Muriel would go inside to tell him. She looked terrified, but after seeing injured adventurers all around her, she reluctantly agreed. The guildmaster even assigned a guard to babysit her. Deeper in the dungeon, Haru and Angelica reached a nightmare floor flooded with water and dangerous whirlpools. To make things worse, the water swarmed with level 81 piranhas, waiting to turn him into chutoi sushi. Knowing he'd be fish food if he hesitated, Haru froze the entire pool with magic, ice barbecuing the piranhas instantly. But the floor's boss wasn't having it. It summoned a massive wave that sent Haru crashing into the water. Instead of drowning, Haru pulled the most anime thing possible. He created a surfboard with earth magic, rode the wave, and slammed his staff onto the fish boss's head like he was auditioning for Tony Hawk Dungeon Edition. As they climbed higher, Haru looted random rare items. A pilgrim's ring that protected against bad luck, a one-time blessed bangle, and even a sketchy necromancy ball. He briefly thought about selling them for money, but in a shocking moment of generosity, shoved them all at Angelica instead, telling her to find her own happiness. She tried to refuse, but he forced her to take them, and the magic instantly began working. While Haru ran off obliviously, Angelica quietly transformed. She removed her helmet to reveal she was no longer a skeleton, but a full-on human woman. Freaked out, she slipped the helmet back on and ran after him like nothing happened. Meanwhile, on the 54th floor, the classmates barely managed to wipe out the werewolves, but they were completely gassed. Just when they thought another wave was coming, footsteps echoed toward them. They braced for more monsters, only for Muriel and the guard to appear instead. When the group explained how they got separated from Haru, Muriel broke down crying. The class rep, somehow the only functional brain cell in the party, reassured her that Haru would find his way back. Back on the 74th floor, Haru and Angelica found themselves standing before a lava lake that radiated enough heat to turn him into instant bacon. Haru, being the genius he was, tried crossing it anyway and nearly collapsed. Angelica had to catch his dumb ass and set him down to rest. While looking for a solution, Haru noticed a hole in the wall blowing cool air. Without hesitation, he shoved his head inside and used wind magic to chill himself down, moaning like a dude discovering AC for the first time. Unfortunately, his noises traveled up the hole, echoing all the way to the 54th floor. Then, the class rep heard his voice and immediately screamed his name back down the tunnel. Haru, realizing this was the same hole he originally fell from, begged them to throw down a rope. Of course, those geniuses didn't have one. They told him about the stampede and how he needed to defeat the dungeon's final boss to save the village. Haru casually replied that he had already beaten it. That's when the confusion started. The class couldn't wrap their heads around why monsters were still swarming everywhere if Haru had already handled the supposed final boss. The guard stared Haru down and asked the obvious, if he'd actually killed the dungeon boss. Because everyone knew the stampede wouldn't stop until that monster was out of the picture. Haru, of course, kept his mouth shut. There was no way he was going to kill Angelica. Not after they'd gone through trauma bonding like two kids sharing trauma stories at summer camp. Finally, he admitted he hadn't killed the boss. The guard nearly blew a vein, insisting that the only solution was killing it, but Haru ignored him like he was background noise. Instead, he turned to Angelica and told her he needed her help. Then he declared to his classmates that he would stop the stampede his own way. The class rep asked if he had a plan, and Haru, being the overconfident idiot he always was, told her not to worry. Shockingly, she believed him. Muriel almost fainted at the sight, wondering how the hell Haru managed to earn blind trust, while she couldn't even earn respect at home. The class rep defended him, saying he'd never failed them even when everything looked hopeless. That pep talk fueled Haru's ego, and he vowed to save both the townsfolk and Angelica no matter what it took. From there, Haru speed ran the dungeon like a streamer, going for a world record. On the 73rd floor, he froze the lizard men into ice cream cones. On the 72nd, he roasted the scorpions like backyard barbecue. When a giant two-headed dog blocked their way on the 70th, he yeeted a potion in its faces to nuke its sense of smell, giving Angelica the opening to slice it in half like expired sausage. After the fight, Haru began sorting through his growing stash of loot. Angelica begged him to rest, but he shook his head. He couldn't pause. People were depending on him. On the 69th floor, which looked like a creepy forest, they ran into a hypnotic owl boss. Haru smirked, confident that his magic nullification would protect him. Unfortunately, the dude was so sleep-deprived that the instant the owl hooted, he collapsed like a freshman at a frat party. Moments later, he woke up cradled in Angelica's arms, being carried like a discount Disney prince. Embarrassed, he muttered thanks as they pressed on. By the time they reached the 59th floor, Haru was drained, but quietly thanked Angelica for carrying him this far. Before he could finish, the ground beneath them began to crumble, and he sensed a familiar aura nearby. Looking up, he saw his classmates, and they were getting bodied by a sphinx. The class rep was on her knees, completely spent, while the sphinx raised its claws to finish her. Just before the killing blow landed, Haru rocketed upwards, slammed onto its back, and jammed his staff into its core, breaking its immortality. Angelica followed up with Operation Crocodile Smile, beheading the monster cleanly in one swing. The rest of the class watched in shock, then rushed over in relief. They immediately asked who the armored knight beside him was. Haru started to explain, but before he could get a word out, the floor collapsed. He barely leapt out in time, bluffing that he had gained new skills to sense structural instability. Then, as if karma wanted to roast him harder, another section of the floor broke apart and sent him tumbling. This time, the class rep dove in, grabbed his hand and, with the boy's help, hauled him back up. There was no time to celebrate. The dungeon itself was collapsing, and hordes of monsters were spilling toward the surface like rats from a sinking ship. Haru told the group he had a plan, and Angelica was the key to stopping everything. But before he could reveal what that meant, the guard cut in, yelling that they had to return to town immediately before it was too late. When the guard suggested using a teleportation portal, Haru almost choked on his own stupidity. He didn't even know such a thing existed. The guard explained it had been locked because the genius boy decided to climb from the bottom up, like an idiot speedrunner glitching through a game. Now that the path was open, they could finally use it. So Haru and his classmates rushed through and made it back to town just before the horde arrived. Unfortunately, that didn't stop the tidal wave of monsters marching forward anyway. The adventurers on the walls stared at the endless swarm, already regretting their career choices. Even the guildmaster looked like he was about to piss himself, trembling harder than an old phone on vibrate mode. The ground shook, the monsters drew closer, and the hopeless atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Then, Haru gave Angelica the signal. Without hesitation, she slammed her sword into the earth, unleashing a lightning storm so massive it fried the entire battlefield like crispy chicken wings. The current spread in all directions, vaporizing the monsters into dust. When the chaos cleared, Haru calmly walked up and fist-bumped her like they just pulled off a dunk at a street ball game. The townsfolk exhaled in relief, still confused as hell about what just happened. The class rep asked if that ridiculous display of power was his doing. Haru smirked, pulled a humble brag, and admitted it wasn't his strength, it was hers. That only raised more eyebrows. One nerd, always desperate to sound smart, pieced it together. Angelica wasn't just strong, she was the dungeon emperor itself. That revelation had half the town ready to pack their bags. Haru quickly calmed them down, explaining that Angelica wasn't their enemy. In fact, she had saved his life countless times in the dungeon. The adventurers nodded, believing him, but the nerd refused to shut up. He demanded to know why a dungeon emperor would allow a stampede in the first place. Haru roasted him on the spot, calling him a know-it-all pest, before clarifying that Angelica's power had weakened when she was bound to him. Still, even nerfed, she could wipe out monsters with a thought. The girls then asked what happened to the dusted creatures. Haru explained they weren't gone forever. They'd just been shoved back into the dungeon where they belonged. That meant the town was finally safe. Back in town, Haru wasted no time throwing a massive party. He casually announced he was putting all the rare dungeon loot up for grabs in a scramble sale. The girls immediately went feral, knocking the boys flat and hogging everything like hyenas at a buffet. Luckily, Haru had anticipated female greed and secretly set aside items for the boys, handing them out later so nobody walked away empty-handed. For a moment, he felt genuinely happy, seeing everyone armed and smiling. Still, his eyes drifted to Angelica, who stood alone in a corner. Just like him, she didn't quite fit in. While Haru sat counting the fat stack of money he made from selling loot, the class rep walked in. He scrambled to hide his treasure like a teen minimizing suspicious tabs, but she didn't notice. Instead, she thanked him for sharing items with everyone. Angelica entered too, earning her gratitude as well. That's when the class rep asked for a proper introduction. Haru obliged, but her curiosity grew. She demanded to know how he managed to get a walking nuclear warhead like Angelica on his side. Suspicion crept into her tone as she asked if he'd used the fabled pheromone ring. Haru denied ever finding it, but his shaky attitude only made things worse. When pressed further, he nervously confessed he had accidentally used servitude. The class rep exploded, yelling at him for recklessly binding a dungeon emperor. Without giving him a chance to recover, she dragged Angelica away, determined to bond with her and keep her under the watch of the girls. Haru was left standing there like a grounded child who just lost custody of his only friend. After training left him looking like roadkill, Haru and Angelica decided to catch some fish for dinner. Of course, Angelica just stood there looking pretty while Haru did all the work. because at this point, he was basically her house husband. He cooked them a massive fish hot pot, proving once again he was now her personal chef, servant, and emotional support gremlin. After the meal, Angelica tried to repay him with a full-body massage, but it felt less like a massage and more like getting stomped by an orc marching band. Haru wanted to scream, but he swallowed the pain, not wanting to hurt her feelings. Afterwards, he dragged his battered body outside with her for some stargazing. They sat on a bench, Angelica looking nervous and sitting far away. Haru tried to ease the mood by patting her head, but this only made her blush harder and scoot even further. She attempted to say thank you, but her voice cracked like a middle schooler in choir. Haru reassured her that she didn't need to force it. He already understood. He then offered to take her back to town, and she quietly agreed. The next day, while heading back, the weather decided to troll them with a downpour. Haru grabbed her hand and sprinted through the rain. By the time they reached town, they were still holding hands, and boom, instant anime drama alert. The girls swarmed Angelica like she was BTS at a fan meet, while the boys jumped Haru, roasting him for finally bagging a girlfriend. Haru, already fed up with their virgin gremlin energy, shoved them aside like yesterday's trash. Then came the big moment. Angelica walked over and tried to speak. Her voice cracked and faltered, but Haru told her it was okay. Just as he turned to leave, she called out to him clearly. Haru froze, wide-eyed, as she finally managed to say thank you before walking back to the girls. Haru stood there, smiling like a proud dad who just watched his kid pass kindergarten. He realized that even though they were all together, everyone was fighting their own personal battles. And with that, this unwanted monk wannabe walked off with peace in his heart, back pain from his waifu's beatings, and the knowledge that at least someone in this cursed class didn't hate him. And that's the end. If you stuck around to the very end, then I have to tell you this. You're an absolute legend. So drop Virgin Slayer in the comments to confuse the bots. Smash that like, hit subscribe, and let us know your favorite anime. We'll probably bully it next.